Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Ewert-Crocker, and the talk that I'm going to give you today is about the characteristics of adolescents and their needs. If there's one aspect of Montessori education that's quite different from other pedagogies, it's that instead of focusing on content, curriculum, and then method to deliver that content, Montessori really focuses on human development, where this human being is, what stage of development they're in, the nature of that stage of development, and therefore what kind of environment, what kind of activities, what kind of relationship with the people and things that are in their environment impact their learning and how their learning unfolds as a process in that environment. So looking at the characteristics of development for each stage is central to the Montessori educator's work. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of adolescence in that way. Like all stages of development, adolescence is complex, and you can spend a lifetime studying it. And as Montessori educators, we do spend a good deal of our time trying to understand and learn about adolescents and how they grow. So who is this adolescent and what are they like? What are the characteristics that are universal in adolescence, and what are the needs that come out of those characteristics? You know, most of Western culture, I think, has a pretty warped view and expectation of adolescence. If you look at the literature that's out there for parents and professionals dealing with adolescence, you'll find that the view is rather alarmist. There's something wrong with adolescence. There's something about this stage of life that causes people trouble, that's mostly problematic, and a little bit to be afraid of. These are all books that I have had on my shelves over the years, and their titles suggest that there's something wrong, that they are out of control and they will mistreat their parents, or they're lost, or they're a little bit crazy, or they lead very secret lives. And the truth is that adolescents are human beings in a period of life that's simply focused on a great deal of change, and change often creates instability or disequilibrium. One of the beautiful things about a Montessori approach to adolescence is that Montessori herself spoke of adolescence with great reverence, not just respect, because a Montessori perspective does focus on respect for all human beings, in whatever their context is, but she actually saw the child who is growing, the child becoming adolescent, becoming adult, as something to revere, to be in awe of, to see as sacred. She called the adolescent a sacred mystery. What is it? She asks. A mystery. Just as the newborn's mind is a mystery, so is the social newborn a mystery. A decisive, delicate period, worthy of our respect, presents itself as our responsibility. She had observed and studied young children for a long time and discovered how much important growth happens from birth to age 6, and how our culture hasn't recognized that or respected it or supported it, and therefore human potential hasn't grown in the way that it could. She saw adolescence as a similar time of growth. She calls the adolescent a social newborn. This is a rebirth, a renaissance, a birth into a new, incredible stage of transformation. And she said the education of adolescence is of capital importance, because adolescence is the age when the child becomes man, which is to say a member of society. If we do not tend to this time of life, we lose the opportunity to support all the capacity and potential that human beings have as they move into adulthood and begin to play their role, make their contribution on the stage of human activity. The adult is emerging from the child in adolescence. We have this period of 6 to 10 years where the substance of that person that formed from birth to age 12 enters another stage of transformation. And that cocoon, that environment, the support that is available or not available to the adolescent as the adult emerges in them makes a difference. This is our last best shot. There's a book in English that is called The Last Best Shot, and it is about this last opportunity in human development to really impact neural pathways, to really shape the kind of person this human being is to become. This is Montessori's chart where she describes the 4 planes of development. And you can see from her chart, which we've already looked at, that those 2 planes in red, the first plane and the third plane, have parallel characteristics. They are these times of very dramatic growth. And she would say, not just growth, but creation, right? That icon of the fire, the flame in the first plane, indicates how much energy is being put into the creation of this human being in all aspects. That level of creation happens again in adolescence. And we're going to talk a little bit about the details of that. But she recognized there's so much growth, there's so much change that you really have to consider even 2 subplanes, 12 to 15 and 15 to 18, because the growth is dramatic during this time. And I will also just point out again that Montessori did not see this like an inclined plane where the older the child or the human being gets, right, the more input we give them. These are windows of opportunity of growth that open and maximize the environment at their height, and then they close again before the next stage begins. So we think about what happens from birth through 6 and how that young child is designed, is engineered, right, to take in the entire environment that they are exposed to with all of their senses, unfiltered. That absorbent mind, taking everything in, and the importance of movement for that child to explore, the importance of sensorial experiences for them to have, and the language that they are exposed to, the choices that they can make in order to develop their will, their ability to be the agent of their own activity. How that needs to happen and how rapidly that happens from 0 to 6. That child is interacting, right, embedded in a small world that is their family and their caretakers and their immediate community and the physical world that they find themselves in. And so they're incredibly focused on establishing relationship in that physical world with the people who are in it, so that they have functional independence in order to operate and adapt to the time and place that they were born in. But it is a small world that they are embedded in. When you get to the 6 to 12-year-old and the reason and the intellect really take off, and imagination helps them to consider all of the possibilities, not only in their smaller world where they grew up, but also in the world beyond them, in the earth and on the planet. So they have their imagination to help them encompass and begin to experience that the world is much larger than they are, and they live on a planet that's had an incredible, wondrous history, a natural history of animals and creatures and changes and evolution, and that planet is part of a universe that's much greater than that. And they can imagine stars and galaxies and the beginning of a universe and the unfolding of time that, that creates galaxies and planets in our solar system. And they imagine all of this with great wonder and awe and interest and curiosity. And it is all available to them equally because of the power of their imagination and their intellect. And they still operate in a smaller community that is their family, but it is a growing community of extended people in their lives and their schools and their peers and families in their local community. And they take that opportunity to practice a society in their own peer group by setting up imaginative relationships and structures and leaders and followers and secret codes and what's fair. And they focus on what's fair and what's just and how people are being treated. And so that 6 to 12-year-old is really able to exist and operate in all of these circles, right? Kind of equally open to whatever's happening in all of them through their reason and their imagination. That shifts dramatically when they enter adolescence, because that 12 to 18-year-old, even though they are still aware of their membership on the planet and increasingly aware of what's going on the planet, and they're still aware of being a part of a greater universe, their focus is not so much on imagining all of that beyond them. Their focus really begins to turn inside, internally, to understand themselves and their role in their immediate environment. And so the other parts of the background fade away a little bit, and they focus very heavily on their own tribe, their own local set of peers and the adults that they interact with on a day-to-day basis and their membership in it. They are concerned primarily in early adolescence with themselves, their identity, who they are, how they belong here in this group right now. And that's the shift, right, from the 6 to 12-year-old to the 12 to 18-year-old. As they move through adolescence, they will be increasingly able to consider how their role and their impact is related to what's going on in the broader world around them, because they are also interested in how society works, how greater society works, so that they can, in the future, become a contributing member. But their focus is very inward and very local during especially early adolescence. So when we think about adolescence, what's important for the adult mindset is not that we think of their problems or their issues or their risks or the difficulty that they may be having or that they may be causing other people, right? It's to consider how this human being is in a stage of great transformation. And when change happens, there are vulnerabilities because new awarenesses emerge, which require new skills and new knowledge to help the individual function adequately and in a healthy way. So mostly what we need to be aware of is that this person has new vulnerabilities, and we need to understand them and figure out how to support them. We also need to be aware that they've already lived on the planet for 12 years or so, and they have strengths, they have knowledge. Some of it's buried deep inside, and we might have to help elicit it from them. But they also have strengths, and they have areas where they need to develop strengths. And so part of our job is to try to make sure that balance of their own vulnerability is supported by knowledge and use of their strengths and by increasing their knowledge and their skill in order for them to discover how much stronger they can be. Their awareness of themselves and their vulnerabilities and their strengths takes time. It happens gradually over many years. Like we say 6 years in Montessori is a plane, but truly adolescence and what happens in the brain lasts almost to age 24. So what a young adolescent doesn't have are the concrete experiences of trial and error and gaining greater knowledge and skill in the world to make the awareness of themselves a healthy one, a full one that's got a balanced view of what they're capable of doing. So we need to provide those concrete experiences to help their awareness assist them in their growth. As I said, Montessori called the adolescent a social newborn. They are newly born into a social context. They are newly born into a different role that takes them increasingly away from their role in the family and presents to them opportunities for roles in a society that includes their family, but is beyond their family. As they make this transition, it doesn't happen overnight. They have to gradually shift into a role of social engagement and social responsibility. But with very little skill and very little experience at the beginning, they are particularly awkward. They need a lot of opportunity to feel their way and make mistakes. Montessori suggested that we remember how delicate a newborn is and to not coddle, not treat adolescents as if they're babies, but to remember the vulnerability of change. Some of the things that she talks about are that the adolescent needs to be protected, but not controlled. We cannot control all the conditions to save them from suffering, save them from challenge. We instead need to respect that this is a delicate physical transition, a delicate age, that it's an age of doubt and hesitation, sometimes of violent emotion and discouragement. And what she says is they're going to need self-confidence. For success in life depends in every case on self-confidence and the knowledge of one's own capacity and many-sided powers of adaptation. The consciousness of knowing how to make oneself useful, how to help mankind in many ways, fills the soul with noble confidence, with almost religious dignity. You know, Montessori's view of human development focused on the capacity of the human being to use all of the intelligences and sensorial capacities that we're born with to adapt. It is what we do as a species. We adapt ourselves to the environment we find ourselves in, and we adapt the environment to meet our own needs. And so really what an adolescent needs to emerge into adulthood, to become a mature human being in the species, is to know that we have many-sided powers of adaptation. And we learn those things through experience. And we're motivated to act on our environment because we feel we are useful, because we're a social being and we're part of a social organization. We need to feel useful, valued, that we have a contribution to make. And that is what motivates us and motivates an adolescent to take the risks of experience that help them to build their skills and their strength. As Montessori says, there's a need to fortify self-confidence. And yet, what we know is that you cannot declare that someone gains self-confidence. Self-confidence grows internally. It grows through agency, right? Agency is that ability to act for oneself, make one's goals, make one's own decisions toward reaching those goals, and doing all the learning that's in the process of getting there. We must do it through activity and agency, not by command or declaration. You cannot knight someone with a sword and say, I declare you now a self-confident adult. You cannot knight someone and say, oh, I valorize you now. I give you value because I declare it so. Value has to be experienced inside, internally, by all of the ways that you can problem solve, make contribution, impact your environment, make yourself useful. Find a role to play that makes a contribution to the organization of your community. And so our job is to provide as many opportunities for that experience as we can. So let's take a look at some of the characteristics that we typically talk about when we're talking about adolescents and the needs that they have given those characteristics. First of all, the physical characteristics. As I've said, this is a dramatic time of change, second only to early childhood, when physical growth happens rapidly, and that includes the onset of puberty and the emergence of the sexual characteristics to become a reproductive adult. There's a lot of hormonal change that happens, as well as body, muscular, tissue, organ change. And there's a great deal of brain development that happens. There's kind of a peak development of gray matter through the 6 to 12 years. And then during adolescence, a pruning process that happens where dendrites are pruned if they're not used, right? So neural pathways are set during adolescence based on the kind of activity that a human being takes on. And so we want lots of strong neural pathways for a variety of skill and activity to be carved over the course of adolescence. So there are many powers of adaptation that an adolescent acquires. We know a lot more about brain development than we used to, and how much happens during adolescence, therefore how impactful the environment and the activity in that environment truly is during this time of life. So what do they need? They need to do physical work, not just intellectual work. The combination of our body activity, our thinking activity, and the use of our hands continues to be crucial in adolescence. You know, I have spoken about in other presentations how somehow we think that once an individual reaches the adolescent years, that they should do all head work, right? Because we have valued intellectual work in our cultures, and we see the problem solving and the calculation and the design and the knowledge as important, which it is. But we have forgotten how much brain development and how much skill and self-functioning happens through our whole person, where when we combine the use of our hands and the use of our senses and the use of our body with our intellect working, we get a much greater and deeper body of knowledge and understanding of the world. That is still important in adolescence. And so they need a variety of work to do, physical, intellectual, and creative work as well. They need physical expression. Physical expression is also a form of expressing identity, and seeking identity, forming identity is an important aspect of adolescence. And so just to have the opportunity to choose ways in which you stay physically healthy and physically experiencing the world is important for adolescents. and for them to explore new ways of physical expression throughout their adolescent time. There's psychological and emotional characteristics. We could talk a lot about that because there's a lot going on inside an adolescent. However, to sum up what's happening with adolescents psychologically, first of all, they feel emotions strongly. Now, a 2-year-old, a toddler, is unable to filter emotional responses. And so they haven't integrated all of the neural networks that will need to be integrated internally. So a toddler, a young child, will cry or respond very strongly, either excited or dismayed or frustrated, right, in an unfiltered way. Adolescents are not that different. They are also experiencing new awarenesses, new experiences, particularly around relationships, around their perception of their role in their peer group, with kind of an unfiltered emotional response. They have to develop more logical thinking, and the brain has to develop more metacognitive ability to think about how they are responding before they are really able to balance those strong emotions that happen, particularly in early adolescence. And this is fatiguing. A young child has to sleep a lot because of all of the unfiltered experiences they have during the day. The same with an adolescent. You will find them not able to sustain work for long periods of time. We've talked often, my colleagues and I, about what we think a work cycle really is for an adolescent, and where you try to preserve a 3-hour work cycle for a young child or for a 6 to 12-year-old. 3 hours is actually pretty long for an adolescent, and you're going to find them curbing their ability to stay focused and productive more like 2 hours or 2.5 hours, depending on how you offer them variations in that, right? Changeover in what they're doing. So they feel vulnerable. They imagine that people are watching them or judging them. They're not quite able to tell what facial expressions are really communicating. There have been studies about how adolescents misread or overinterpret facial expressions and feel not safe in a situation where we might say they were absolutely safe. So why did they react that way? They don't always know. If you ask an adolescent, so why did you do that? They'll probably say, I have no idea, because they're not able to completely understand or be aware of their own responses yet. What we also see is that growth is very inconsistent, where they will show mastery one day, the next day they may look like they have lost that mastery, whether that's mastery of an algebraic equation or use of a tool, or the ability to have a conversation at an intellectual or an abstract level, because what was clear yesterday, today might be clouded by an emotional response to a situation. However, as Montessori points out, they are highly creative at this time of life. They are creating a self. They are creating an identity. They are creating perspectives on the world. And creative tendency is one of those powers that we can tap and we can feed. Creativity in creating something new is one aspect of this. But when Montessori talks about creative tendencies, she's saying they are in the process of creation of their own self. So they are taking in a lot of what they're experiencing, and they are working to integrate those experiences to form a sense of who they are and what they're capable of doing. We need to support that and feed that. So Montessori talks about them needing to be protected. And this is, it's risky to say this because we're not talking about controlling them. We're not talking about protecting them from all harm or all suffering. Of course, we want to save them from serious harm, but they really should not be protected from the experience that gives them feedback. What they need is feedback from the world and from people, and the safety to process that feedback and understand it. They need a safe environment where they feel they can make mistakes and try new things and have people who will understand them and tell them the truth with care and love. They don't want to be lied to, and they don't want people doing things for them. They want to be supported. They want clarity. They want non-judgmental feedback on what's happening. So they need to be able to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And they need a rich variety of experiences. And so they need to rotate through different kinds of challenges, different kinds of projects and studies. And they can't be doing the same thing every day, day after day, or the same thing that everybody else is doing. There needs to be choice and variety within the work that they are tackling. They need to be able to try out adult roles, which means the work that we give them, both what they study and what they do with their hands and their bodies to contribute to their community, that needs to feel like it would be work an adult would do. And the responsibility they're being given gives them a sense of being trusted to do something important and serious and valuable. They need lots of opportunities for self-expression because of this drive to form an identity, and also a drive to connect with the people around them in significant ways. They need to be able to express what's going on inside them. And that happens through language, but not always through language, because language is very logic oriented. It's very left brain, logic centered. The arts, intuitive, visual, spatial expressions are also valuable as avenues for them to find ways to express what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, and what they're thinking for themselves and also for other people. Montessori says adolescents are characterized by a state of expectation. They are expecting something to happen. They're expecting to become someone. So they have this tendency towards creative work, because creating something moves you into impact rather than just expecting and waiting. They need to move beyond waiting into doing. One of the pitfalls of seeing adolescents as teenagers, right, or to think about them as the teenage years, is that we've created this long period of time where they are waiting to be an adult. They're not designed for that waiting. They're designed to do things that get them to adulthood. So we have to help them find activities that get them to adulthood. But they will be drawn to creative expression in the arts. And so we need to provide opportunities for that. The arts, whether drama, music, the visual arts, dance, also activates the brain and the whole body in ways that lay down neural pathways that allow them to process experience. That's important. Another need that they have is they need to feel that they have worth, that they feel dignity, that they're respected, and that they feel self-worth. Montessori uses the term valorization to describe this experience of self-worth. And she says they need to experience valorization of personality in making him feel himself capable of succeeding in life. by his own efforts and on his own merits. When Montessori talks about personality, she's talking about the whole person growing and developing. And so the adolescent feeling that they are capable of succeeding in life, lots of different aspects of life, by their own activity, their own effort, their own capacity and ability. Given that they feel vulnerable in that process, it's an art to providing those experiences which help them reach valorization without doing the work for them. That's the real trick of working with adolescents. And I can't say that I can tell you exactly how you do it, but you spend a lot of time observing, watching, carefully responding, carefully offering and inviting without control. One of the other needs that they have, and Montessori talks a great deal about this in her writing, is that they need to experience economic independence. They need to understand how human beings have organized themselves in economic systems. Montessori observed, and we observe clearly, right, that human beings operate by production and exchange, right? That's actually the phrase that she uses. They produce things, they exchange services, they exchange products. And because of this, we have an elaborate interdependency among human beings that relies on people contributing the pieces and parts of our systems that meet our needs so that we survive and thrive. Adolescents are driven to understand this. They see it, but they don't necessarily understand how it works. And so we need to introduce them to economic exchange, to production and exchange, and they need to partake in it in a way that they can begin to understand how it works simply and then how it works in more complex ways. And the older they get, the more able they are to understand the complexity. Often adolescents see only the byproducts or the face, like the superficial face of economic activity, advertisements, right? Marketing to them. Or they see acquisition of money or money being spent on material objects. What they don't see is how complex human economic interdependency is and how many of the things that allow them to be fed and clothed and housed are a result of a very complex interdependency with people who are contributing to their lives from all over the world in the food that they eat and the clothing that they wear. To begin to see this interdependency as a global interdependency is an important aspect of a Montessori lens on how humans around the world are united. So they need to participate enough to acquire some economic independence, to be able to succeed by their own efforts. Montessori calls this the supreme reality of life, that this is how we function as human beings. She also talks about supranature as that aspect of the world that human beings have modified, right? In taking the natural world and natural resources, using it, creating on top of it, creating with it, and that supranature is what adults do. We modify the environment to meet our needs. So the supreme reality of life is that this is what adults do. This is the work of adults. And adolescents need to be gradually invited into that work of creating a supranature and participating in the interdependent system of production and exchange that humans participate in. So they need to experience some of the fundamental mechanisms of society. Division of labor, the use of natural resources, the contribution of different kinds of work, both manual and intellectual. And she says that in many places in her writing, both are equally valuable. We could not exist without both of those kinds of work. And increasingly, we should all be capable of valuing and understanding how the two are related within ourselves, manual and physical work. Adolescents then need to experience some practical adult responsibilities. They need to be able to step outside their family homes, which are often, right, governed and run by their parents. They may have chores or jobs that they do within that family structure, but they need to step outside of that in order to experience really being responsible for their own daily needs, that they know how to feed themselves and other people, that they don't know how to care for children, and maintain their own environment, design, build, repair, sustain, right? That they begin to themselves function in a way that uses natural resources and keeps track of them, their waste, their energy use, right? Their water quality, their acquisition to water, soil, and air, and their use of it and what happens after it's used and how human beings impact that. So practical responsibility for their environment is important at a concrete level. And so Montessori suggests that they live together in a community where they must be accountable for and responsible for the daily activities of this community. And they need to experience that this is organized in a way that human beings function in order to make the work productive and efficient. In doing that, if they live and study and work together in this way, taking responsibility for their community's everyday needs and also for the acquisition of adult knowledge and adult skills, they're going to experience firsthand what it means to be an interdependent, organized social community. This is the supreme reality of life. And you cannot just have someone tell you about it. You cannot just see a chart in a PowerPoint or on the board to say, oh, look how socially organized we are. When you experience it, it becomes part of your internal understanding of the way the world works and of the way human beings work together to maintain the environment that helps them to thrive. They may not consciously talk about their experience while they're in it. In fact, they may complain about cleaning their rooms or having to muck the stalls or clean the environment or fix something that's broken. But they are capable over time of articulating how much they understood the value of that interdependent social organization. And I have heard that time and time again from students who have reached a level of metacognitive articulation. They know and they experience and they value what it is they were contributing in that moment. When Montessori talks about the intellectual characteristics of adolescence, one of the things she says is that, there seems to be a decrease of intellectual capacity. And she's comparing that with the 6 to 12-year-old who has this just mushrooming awe and curiosity about the world and the universe and how everything works. Like the 6 to 12-year-old wants to know how does this work? Why does this work? Can I do it? Can I see it? Can I imagine it? Can I write a story about it? The adolescent is interested in their own role, in their own growth and identity. So their brain is developing abilities to abstract in a greater and more rapid way. But the use of that abstract ability, that intellectual ability, depends on whether or not they find it useful or purposeful. Their intellectual work is more successfully engaged when they understand the purpose of it, when they see that there's going to be a role for them to play and it's going to have an impact. So as they work towards metacognition, which is the ability to think about how they're thinking, they will have an up and down, uneven, inconsistent trajectory towards demonstrating what they know and how they can think. And if we're shaping it all along, if we're including it as part of the process of all of the work that they're doing, they will come out of that 6-year time period having fully developed critical thinking skills and also critical empathy for other people's perspectives. So when we're working with them intellectually, academically, we need to remember that they need choice so they can have purposeful work. They need our patience for the inconsistency that they're probably going to show us. They need our empathy for their vulnerabilities and also on the lookout for their strengths. They need individuation, right? So that we're not treating each of them exactly like everyone else, but we're observing to understand this particular individual and how they are working at the moment. They need time. They need time to work and make mistakes and time to grow. They need opportunities to fail and try again. And they need more than assessment. They need feedback. Whether they're writing a report or a paper or they're building or constructing something, what they need is the feedback that's going to inform them about the process and how it's working so they can adapt and gain greater skill and understanding. Our cultures have been more focused on assessment and putting assessment into quantified numbers than it has been about the quality of the feedback that we provide or that others provide or that the activity provides that actually helps the learning process. We all learn best when what we're doing is freely chosen, has purpose for us, and as we're doing it, we get the kind of feedback that clarifies how well we're doing what we're doing. Adolescents need that in spades. They need it a lot. So socially, we know that they're very focused on their tribe and their peers, and they're seeking the approval of their peers. We know that they learn in social situations. And so we provide social groups, collaborative work that gives them both the opportunity to work in a group, but also to have a role and an individual contribution in that work. We know that there's risk-taking involved, and there's going to be some risk-taking in establishing social relationships, some of which may not work well for them, and they're going to have to learn through the painful experience resulting a relationship that has resulted in some pain and some hurt, and helping them get through that is an important part of their growing process. We know that they are very loyal to their peers and the membership in their group. They're much more loyal to their peers than they are to adults. And we can't be insulted by that. We simply have to accept that's the way their brain is working. It's what their brain is telling them to do. They will be interested in more privacy, and it's an art to be able to respect privacy and also observe well enough to help when help is needed. Romantic relationships will begin, and they'll navigate that and need support, and sometimes our feedback and sometimes our patience as that process happens. They have this unfiltered empathy, especially in early adolescence, where they over empathize with somebody who is suffering and feel it themselves in a powerful way. And they can do that through fiction or through movies, right? Or heroes or celebrities or just people they imagine living a life because they're trying to understand what people's lives are like. We can use that capacity to help them imagine role playing or help them imagine the lives of people in different places and times in history, also as a learning process. Their focus right now is on their tribe. on the peers that they have an immediate contact with. And so helping that whole tribe to be a respectful community helps the individual with growth. So they're going to need opportunities for peer relationships, opportunities to work with peers, healthy risk-taking opportunities, relevant social context for their work. Why am I doing this work? How is it contributing? They'll need experiences of different roles in their community so they can understand their different roles to take in society, even for one person. One adult has many roles. We have a role in our work, in our jobs and careers. We have a role in our families, in our significant relationships. We have roles as citizens. We have roles as friends. Those are all roles that adolescents need to experience and refine and understand. One of the things we need to offer them are the stories of people from different contexts, different cultures, different places. The more stories they have of people around the world and in the past, the more they're able to chart their empathy towards the richness of human culture and the respect of differences in human culture and perspective. Because certainly one of the things we want them to come out of adolescence with is the ability to take different perspectives and look for the context of people's actions, behavior, and their ideologies. They need lots of opportunities for problem solving in every area of life, right? Whether that's figuring out how to pay the bills, figuring out how to feed people and be a healthy person, or solving a complex math problem or an equation, or figuring out how to write text that's going to reach an audience and have an impact. There are lots of different problems to solve, and they need to be involved in many of them. And it's important, I think, to remember that Montessori, when she talks about sensitive periods in the young child, she's saying, look, we're designed to be particularly sensitive to certain aspects of development that are going to serve us well. And that happens with the young child. With the adolescent, she says this is a sensitive period when there should develop the most noble characteristics that would prepare a man to be social. That is to say, a sense of justice and personal dignity. She observed, and we observe, adolescents are sensitive to their own, to how people treat them, to their own dignity, their own need, right, for personal dignity and a sense of justice for themselves. And at the same time, they are sensitive to that in others as well. This is an important sensitivity to develop a moral character, to develop moral awareness of how we interact with other people and consider their needs and their perspectives. We need, as adults, to act with great dignity and respect toward adolescents. And so we can model that, and we can help shape and support their acting with sensitivity towards the dignity of others. So there's some additional highlights of adolescent development that Montessori doesn't necessarily talk about. And we've talked about identity formation. There are many aspects to identity, 8, 10, 11 different aspects of identity, including gender identity, political identity, religious identity, ethnic or cultural identity. And an adolescent is working on sorting all of that out during the time that we are with them. There is an increase in the ability to be abstract and to think abstractly in the brain. And they are working towards a brain change that's going to happen sometime in mid to late adolescence. It happens because that's the way the human brain is designed. And the human brain will kick into the ability to think more about how I think, right? What's going on in me and what that means, which means the individual can extract themselves a little bit from what's going on inside them to analyze, right? Kind of from an outside point of view. Doesn't happen till around age 16 or 17. And so we can't expect that of the young adolescent, but we can certainly begin to see it in the older adolescent and begin to challenge that metacognition with different perspectives, different ways of thinking. We know a lot of dendrites are forming in the brain during adolescence and that they will be pruned during this time. They will be cut back as neural pathways are formed. Dendrites that do not get used, neural pathways that do not get used or formed are not going to be there as the adult emerges from that adolescent. We know that adolescents need adult mentors. They need adults in their lives that are not their parents so that they can study adulthood in a variety of people and also get the kind of feedback they need about adulthood from different people. We know that this is a time of risk-taking. We're understanding a little more neurologically about why that happens. There is a development of the subcortical regions, which is the social emotional reward part of the brain that is developing in advance of the prefrontal cortex, where logical thinking and executive function happening. Now, both are developing, but the social reward center dominates over the executive functioning logical center of the brain for a period of time in adolescence. And the greatest gap in that is around age 16. And so what we're finding out, what neuroscientists are finding out, is that you can extract the logic of a situation from an adolescent. They can tell you what the consequences of behavior might be or why you should or should not engage in particular behaviors. And still, the social emotional reward of a situation will take over and keep the logical part of the brain suppressed, right? So they don't have the brake system. They don't have the ability to control impulse or behavior that's going to be highly rewarding for them socially, even if they understand the logic of it. And why would that be? Well, because risk-taking behavior is also evolutionary, an evolutionary advantage. An adolescent would need to take risks to do important work for the tribe, to go out and meet new tribes and new people beyond the horizon of their local community. Risk-taking serves the human race. It serves humanity. Our adolescents are the ones on the forefront of change, of looking at new ways of thinking and doing things, and they have the ability to take those risks for all of us without being held back by logic. As we get older, our past experience logic holds us back from risk-taking. Yes, that's security, but it's also not innovation. And adolescents are born and designed to be the innovators. So we need to remember and respect that. It's an important part of who they are and what they can contribute. We know that older adolescents, being more metacognitive, right, do have increased abilities and refinement in a lot of areas. And it's important to remember that 15 to 18-year-old will be more physically mature, closer to an adult body, functioning body, that they are able to refine their thinking and be a more abstract, logical thinker. They can focus better. They start to differentiate themselves from other people more. And because their identity is beginning to coalesce, they're beginning to understand who they are and who they want to be. They are more emotionally mature. And even though there will still be emotional setbacks and some suffering and tragic relationship experiences, they handle it better than the young adolescent does. They have more ability to make decisions, to plan, to organize, to follow through on the work and the goals that they set for themselves. They'll be able to think about things abstractly and talk about them, reflect on them more abstractly. This is an optimal time for spiritual development because their identity, they've done some exploring in identity and they're beginning to sort through their own ideology and their beliefs. And so this is an important time for that to happen. They will be more future oriented than the young adolescent is. The young adolescent is much more focused on the here and the now. Sometimes we say a 24-hour bubble they operate in. They don't look past the next couple of days in their organizing and their thinking. Often they're in the immediate now. The older adolescent really seriously is looking at what's going to happen next week, next year, and beyond that. And we can see that their interest in shaping their future is much, much keener and more refined. So that's a pretty quick run through of a lot of aspects of adolescence. And we see not only how complex they are, how critical this time is, how much transformation needs to happen and will happen, and therefore how much we can provide and need to work to provide in the kind of environment that will give them the opportunities to grow themselves. And again, I just leave you with that emphasis that in Montessori, it's not our job to make the growth happen. We are not the change agents for human beings. We are the preparers of the environment. We are the support system, the scaffolding. We're observing and trying to provide from the periphery the opportunities for skill and the feedback, right? The helpful, non-judgmental, targeted, specific feedback an adolescent needs in whatever process they're involved in, whether it's a physical, manual skill, whether it's a thinking skill. Our job is to shepherd their independence, to be there with respect for their vulnerability and respect for their dignity, to provide the community where respect is honored and activity is valuable and important, where the work is adult enough, right? It's like adult work enough that they feel the call to it and the seriousness of it and the potential of their own impact. We're here to help them help themselves so they can fortify their self-confidence and their self-awareness by doing the work themselves with others in collaboration with the social group. So I thank you for your attention.